Before this experience, I never believed in the paranormal. Now, there is no doubt in my mind.
818 Stories.
This is a true story.
I worked at a bar in Fort Worth, Texas, on Houston Street, close to the convention center. I was in my mid-20s and struggling to find work at the time, but this place was very quick to hire both me and my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. We started at the bar as bartenders, but my wife quit shortly after because the place was dead. It just didn't get very many customers, and it was suspicious that they let us work the bar with no prior experience. The bar had a small hallway kitchen in the back that led to a small office where we kept the safe. We had a cook named Ronnie who worked back there, but bolted the second his shift would end around 10 p.m. I made a joke with him one evening about the lack of guests being because the place was haunted. Ronnie was an older guy who had grown up hard and served time in prison. He was tough and rough around the edges, and when I said that, the joking stopped. He looked at me with an intensity in his eyes that made me uneasy. He told me there was something in the building, and there was a reason he didn't stay late. He said it was the spirit of a cowboy. With how serious he was, I was not about to question him. I didn't want to get on his bad side. I played along, but in my mind, I thought either he was a little out of touch or just messing with me. An older woman named Kathy I worked the bar with told me that the spirit inhabited the place and that she had seen him, but come on, a cowboy ghost? Honestly, at this point, I thought maybe they were just messing with me being the new guy and all. A few days later, one of our shift leads who closed the bar quit unexpectedly after a night shift. I figured it was due to the business not being so hot. Still, it was kind of strange. The bar manager promoted me to shift lead, and I was told I'd be closing the bar the following week. I barely got this job, and now I was a shift leader. I couldn't believe it. I'd be able to take that experience there and apply to another bar that made some real money after a while, I thought. This all changed when I worked that closing shift. I came in the evening of the day I would be shift lead and began helping Kathy with the bar. That night, we had our one other cook, Sam, working. He was a quiet guy who was a combat veteran and had served a long stint in prison. He, like Ronnie, would also leave the bar the second the clock hit 10 p.m. It was just us three that night. Sam would be leaving at 10 p.m. and Kathy would be leaving at 11 p.m. I would work until 2 a.m. and close the bar down. The shift was dead for hours. We had a few people here and there, but most of the time was spent in the alley out back smoking cigarettes with Kathy and Sam. The night crawled on, but at roughly 9 p.m., the place was flooded with people from a fitness convention that had just let out down the street. It was hectic, lots of large parties. It was the busiest I'd ever seen the place. Right at 10 p.m., Sam left out the back as usual. Now it was just alcohol sales. People got rowdy and things got messy. At 11 p.m., Kathy was preparing to leave, but I begged her to help me get these people served as I couldn't handle it all alone. She reluctantly agreed, and at 12 a.m., things began to die down. I thanked her for her help. Before she left, she looked at me and wished me luck closing. The way she said it seemed off. That's the best way I can think to put it. At roughly 12:30 a.m., the last of the people from the convention had left. The bar was absolutely trashed though. There was no way in hell I could clean the entire place, I thought, but it had to be done. I began to clean the bar. Now this bar, when you walk in, has rows of TVs on both sides. I turned them up to have some comfort, as I felt a little uneasy working alone, but while I was cleaning the tables, they all suddenly muted. We had one remote that would work for every TV, but you would have to hit the mute button, aiming at the TVs one by one. They all just cut out. As soon as they did, I heard something fall in the kitchen. I'd be lying if I said this did not scare the crap out of me. I ran back to the kitchen and didn't see anything out of place. I went back to the TVs to figure out what was going on with them, but couldn't find an explanation. I went and got the remote from the bar and started unmuting the TVs, one by one. I continued to clean. By roughly 1 in the morning, I realized there was no way I was going to have the place clean by closing. It would take until 3 in the morning, at the earliest. I was a little creeped out by what had happened earlier, so I did not like this one bit, and I began to become more and more uneasy. I was sweeping at this point when I heard a thunderous crash of dishes in the kitchen. I got angry, as I knew this would mean more work, and threw the broom down. Also, it was creepy. I went back to the kitchen to investigate, and nothing. There was nothing out of place. I felt like I was being watched, and I looked down the long hall of the kitchen area to the small office with the safe. Something just felt off about that room. I went back to sweeping, and I swept as fast as I could. But the TVs all muted themselves at the same time again. I couldn't believe it. My heart was racing. I decided I would turn off the TVs, as that would be better than them muting themselves. After I turned off the TVs, I was really starting to get freaked out with how quiet it was. So I called Kathy, hoping she'd answer. I just wanted anyone in the bar with me at this point. I'd have paid her to stay with me. I figured I'd call her and just tell her the place was still a wreck and I needed some more help. I was hopeful when she answered, but she said she couldn't as she was already home and it was late. She was obviously annoyed, and I didn't tell her much about what was happening, as I was kind of embarrassed and thought it might just be me scaring myself. I felt bad even asking her. In a really stupid moment of desperation, I ran outside and asked a homeless man if he'd come in and just sit in one of the booths while I closed. I'd give him as much soda and water as he wanted and turn on one of the TVs for him. He was a sketchy looking guy and looked at me like I was from another planet, but he agreed and came in. He said he wanted a Coke, I got him one. I'm now cleaning as fast as I possibly can, but then this guy started screaming at the top of his lungs at the TV. At this point, I'm terrified, and I realize how stupid it was to do this. I shouted from the bar for him to quiet down, and he did. Right after that, he got out of the booth and went into the bathroom. A while has gone by, and I need to clean the bathroom, so I go to open the door. But when I do, I see this man spinning around in a circle, peeing everywhere, all over the floor. I regret saying this, but I had completely lost any composure. My fear had turned to anger. I started screaming at him, yelling and cursing, telling him to get out. He hesitated, but I just kept yelling at him to leave, and he did. It's now after 2 a.m., and I'm cleaning the bathrooms. I hear a bang in the kitchen every now and again, but just ignore it and focus on cleaning and leaving the place as quickly as possible. It is taking every fiber of my being to not just leave the place. I needed this job, though. Finally, I'm at the register behind the bar, and it's time to do the money. I pulled out the binder from below the register that had closing procedure steps for cash handling. I'm taking deep breaths and trying to focus on the words when I'm so relieved to hear Kathy laughing out in the back alley. I hear the door in the back swing open and slam shut. I was so happy Kathy had decided to come back up to the bar. Maybe she had forgotten something. Maybe she had come because she heard how scared I was over the phone. She said something in the kitchen, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. I called out to her, but I heard nothing in response. I put the closing procedure binder down and go back to see what she said, and to thank her for coming back up to the bar.
The door in the kitchen is locked though.
No one is back there, and it is now eerily quiet again. I'm starting to panic. I decided I would speed up the cash handling and just leave. I go back to the binder in front of the register when I hear a woman's voice in the back hall again. I didn't know what she was saying, but I called out asking if it was Kathy messing with me. Silence. I go back to the binder and feel a tingling on my left side. I'm being watched. This is a little embarrassing, but I began to cry. I had never been so scared, but I continued following the procedures while I was not daring to turn to my left. But then it happened. My name was shouted by a woman to my left. It was clear as day. At this point, I was sure it had to be Kathy. It was her voice. Boy, she sure got me. I turned to my left, and no one is there. I call out one more time for Kathy. Silence. I threw the procedure binder down as hard as I could and sprinted to the front door, bumbling to unlock it. At this point, I'm shaking uncontrollably, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. I opened the door and tried to breathe, standing in the doorway. I pulled out my phone thinking I'd call 911. I don't know what good it would have done, but I wasn't thinking straight. My phone was dead. I noticed across the street there's a group of men walking, hollering at each other playfully. I called out to them and asked if I could use one of their phones to call the police. They told me they were off-duty police officers and ran over. There were 4 of them. The men asked me what was going on. I told them everything. They asked if I was on something, and I told them I wasn't. They offered to clear the building for me. Something didn't feel right about this, but I let them in. They quickly look around and make their way to the back. All 4 of them were now in the kitchen. One of them waved for me to come back there. They said that they had believed the building was clear, but pointed at the safe down the long hall and said they didn't check in there. They said if I went down there, they'd come with me to check it. Now I'm worried. I'm going to get robbed. I told them it was not necessary. One of them was persistent, though. Eventually, one of the other guys looked at him and quietly shook his head. They didn't say anything after that. They just left. I locked the door behind them, and now I finally decided I've had enough of this hellish night. I grab all the money from the register area and run back down the hall to the safe. I decide I'm not going to count it. I'm just going to dump it in the room, lock the door, and leave. I'd turn in my key the next day and quit. Well, as I lock the door to the small office room, I hear a loud thud of heavy shoes behind me on the ground walking toward me. They started down the hall, and I could feel whatever it was staring at me. I turned around,
And no one was there.
I don't remember what I yelled, but it was vulgar and directed at whatever entity was toying with me. There was a small, eerie silence, and then the biggest pot hanging in the kitchen on my right falls to the ground with a massive clang. My heart had more than dropped. It had completely fallen out of my body. I was hollow and completely terrified. The impact shattered the silence and any bit of courage I had left in me. There has never been a time before or after that moment that I have been more afraid. It was total despair. I felt this thing was about to ramp up whatever it was doing, and I did not want to be there to find out what that would entail. I ran out of the building, locked the door, fumbled the keys to get into my car, but eventually did. I got in and sped home. The next day I went up to the bar to quit. I didn't bother explaining what had happened, as I was in shock and began to question my own sanity. I've seen multiple mental health professionals since then, had an MRI, and tried to find any rational explanation I could for that night. I still cannot. The next day I went up to turn in my keys, and I quit. Shortly after that, I decided to have a drink at another bar down the street. That's all I remember from that day. I woke up 8 hours later in an ambulance, miles away from the city. I have no idea how I got there. There's probably an easier explanation for that bit, though. Anyways, that's my paranormal experience.
What would you have done?
Please like, comment, and subscribe.